Q&A, right?
I think you hosted this on like day 2 or something, didn't you?
Yeah, from an olive grove. It was astonishing.
Great, I tell ya. Welcome everyone. Is anyone here in an olive grove or are you elsewhere? Feel free to rename yourself where you are in the world. And have a think of any questions you might want to bring up. I'll go over the schedule just to give you a little reminder, but Roger's thinking about talking a little bit about what also makes an experience traumatic versus distressing, and a little bit about big T, little t trauma to start, to whet your appetites, if that's the right way to put it. I don't know. And also there was a question yesterday about the expression of anger, so we might get to that as well. Did you enjoy this morning's session? So some interesting ones, I think. Mark talked about mysticism and trauma, and there was one on letting go, which he did with Daniela. So, we're on the hour, so let me get this started. So welcome everyone to this session. This is our final Q&A session with Roger Mills, and if this is your first one, that's okay. I'll give you a little background on Roger. He's an EMDR therapist. He's been a psychotherapist and a trainer specialised in working with PTSD, practicing for over 20 years, and has worked with the UK National Health Service, the NHS, and the Priory Group before focusing on his own private practice. So as well as his therapeutic work, Roger has devised and delivered numerous training programs on trauma and related subjects. So just as a little background, since the last Q&A yesterday, there's been some stuff on looking at COVID and political stuff, inner critic. We also had some look at safety and trauma for healthcare professionals, emergency responders, humanitarians. And then today there was some stuff on trauma and mysticism, trauma and control, and also trauma and money stuff. So how trauma can title was how trauma can keep you poor. So that's a little bit of a background. You can still share this event. I'll post it there. Obviously it's the final day, but there's replays until September 22, so the replay link is there for you as well. And if you'd like to check out the courses, there's Ilan's course, which is about healing, getting to a good enough level so you can have relationships and work in your life. And then there's the courses on getting good enough to grade, the superpower post-traumatic growth courses, which is more like, okay, well, I've healed to a good enough level, now I'm going to build some of those coping mechanisms can actually become skills where you can become exceptional in particular fields. There's ones for personal superpowers and also ones for facilitators to support others doing that. So that's what the courses are about. And then finally, just before this session, obviously we've got Roger, who's a therapist, and he's answering questions, but just a reminder that this is not therapy. So if you are in the midst of something sort of quite challenging or anything like that, we'd recommend one-to-one therapy. This is just educational, so it's not meant to serve as that. So just do bear that in mind. And if anything difficult does come up, then we recommend, spending some time with some good people, eating some good food, resting, going for a walk in nature, just generally moving about and sort of bringing yourself back here to this present moment. So that's either during this session or if something comes up afterwards, after hearing something and it takes a little while to hit you, we also recommend that. So just integration, rest time, and being healthy. So also don't binge watch these sessions. If you've watched all the morning sessions and you don't necessarily have a question, you may catch this on replay. Otherwise, if watching is kind for you, are you resourced? If that's okay, then that's good. And I'll let Roger get started. Obviously, type questions here in the chat. Roger might just give a little overview on what makes things traumatic versus distressing, and big T, little t trauma to start things off, and then wait for the questions to come through.
Okay, hi everybody. Yes, I thought it'd be interesting to just talk a bit about the question of what makes an event traumatic. I think this comes into my mind because sometimes in sessions with people, clients will say to me, I feel I'm kind of taking up your time or wasting your time. I mean, it's not as if I've been in a war zone or anything like that, but I am feeling very disturbed by something. And I think the important point here is that what makes an event traumatic is not actually the scale of the event. It's not about how horrific or threatening or disturbing it was. It's actually about your perception of that event. And of course, it's important to notice that two people can have very different responses to the same event, and one person could be traumatized by it and another person not. I mean, let's take, for example, suppose you've got two people walking down the road. One of them is a sort of special forces trained person who's on holiday. The other is an ordinary member of the public, none of that sort of training. And somebody appears out of nowhere and runs at them with a knife. Chances are that the special forces person would not be traumatized by that because they've got so much training to deal with that. So their perception of it is, this is an attacking event, but I know what to do. Whereas the person without that training may very well be traumatized by it. So the important point here is it's how you see the event. And then, of course, what happens in you following the event. So how it's held in your memory and also how it's held in your body. So if you start developing symptoms like strong anxiety, it triggers things that remind you of what happened. And triggers can be very, very general and non-specific things. If you're having intrusive thoughts, flashbacks, if you're finding yourself avoidant in some way, some of those hyperarousal symptoms that I've talked about already, so sleep disturbance, irritability, difficulty concentrating, those sorts of things. Basically, if your life, if how your life is feeling changes dramatically following the event, then that suggests that that event has been traumatic for you. And people will have very different reactions, and it's very, very important that nobody feels self-critical, and this can happen, of course, because they have been traumatized by something when somebody else hasn't. Your reactions, none of us know in advance how we will react to a threatening event, and some people will have intensive reactions, some people won't. And there's no right or wrong in terms of our ways of responding to something traumatic. So yeah, the main takeaway here, I think, is that it's about your perception of the event and then how you hold that event in terms of symptoms, rather than the scale of the event itself. Anything coming up in the questions? If there's nothing coming through, then I'll just talk a little bit also about something that I'm sure has been mentioned quite a bit during the week, about the difference between what we call uppercase T or big T trauma and small t trauma. So uppercase T trauma is sort of the, if you like, the more obvious kind of traumatic event that is likely to be traumatic for people. So it's the sort of thing where people experience an event that is threatening in a way that there is a fear that you might die, or you might be seriously injured, or you might be violated in some way, abuse, rape, something like that. And of course, it's also important to remember that it's not just being personally threatened by those things, but witnessing those things is also profoundly traumatic for many people. So big threats are what we're really referring to with uppercase T trauma. Small t trauma is a subtler thing, and often it goes back to childhood. And small t trauma, really, I think the thing to look out for there is, are you finding yourself having what seems like an out of proportion reaction to something that you think, well, somebody else might not be troubled by this? So take the example of somebody who is criticized by their boss for some piece of work that they've done, and they find themselves feeling extremely disturbed by that, rather than thinking, okay, well, maybe I made a mistake or two, but I can put that right, and this isn't the end of the world. When somebody has a very, very powerful reaction to an event that you can think, okay, other people wouldn't necessarily find this so difficult, so threatening. And also, I think, interesting to think about there is when you have that sort of reaction, how old do you experience yourself to be? What's going on in your body? These are signs that there's some small t trauma. And small t, what I'm talking about here is things that often, as I said, go back to childhood experience, and a very normal part of the work that I do as a therapist is looking at an experience somebody has in the present, and then you trace it back to things that they experienced when they were growing up. Often what we're looking at here is attachment patterns. I don't know how many of you are familiar with attachment theory. Very, very important in psychotherapy these days. And this is really to do with the kind of parenting that somebody had, and whether that parenting was in any way abusive, whether it was in any way neglectful, whether it was in any way chaotic. Those are the sorts of things that we look for. And it's also important to remember here with small t trauma that sometimes the problem is rooted not in something that actually happened, but in things that were left out. So the problem is omission. So was a child comforted when something distressing happened? Were parents interested in you? Were parents actually there? Were you left with a childminder all the time? These are the sorts of things that can actually have a very profound effect on people and set you up for small t trauma reactions. And often we're looking here at what we kind of think of as the sort of the drip, drip, drip of experience, not one big event, but constantly repeated disturbing or difficult experiences for a child. So I hope that helps us to understand a bit more about the differences between small t and big T trauma. Steve, what have we got coming up?
Thanks, Roger. I was wondering if we could touch on that question first from yesterday, then we've got a couple other ones. So yesterday's question about anger. So I guess where it lies in the expression of anger and whether it's useful to, like, where the boundary lies between suppressing something and expressing it, and then over-expressing and practicing anger, this sort of thing, where you sit with anger expression.
Well, I think that most therapists would be, and I'm one of them, would be very much on the side of not bottling up or repressing emotions. And suppressed anger is certainly something that can do you a lot of damage. So it's very important to be able to, in the right context, express anger. And you know, in a therapy session, for example, that's a very appropriate place to be able to express angry feelings. Also, you know, some people will have suppressed anger in a way which means that they're not actually aware that it's there, and that's one of the things that you would hope to be able to bring up to the surface in a therapy session. As far though as the expression of anger is concerned, it's also really important to remember the context. You know, if you express your anger, is it going to be damaging to anybody else? In a therapy session, it's absolutely fine. It's a safe place to do it. Therapists are prepared for it and so on. But if you're expressing your anger in you know, social contexts at home, chances are it might be damaging to your relationships. It could lead to some healing. But people who are constantly on the attack, constantly angry, are very likely to be damaging their relationships, which is then going to be deepening the problems that they're experiencing in all probability. So it's a kind of yes but answer here, I think. It's important to be able to express our emotions, but it's also important to express them in ways that are safe, if you like, ways that are not going to be more damaging to us rather than less damaging to us. I mean, obviously there's a lot more that one could say here, and every individual context is going to be important. But you know, the expression of anger in you know, in a family context can be very, very destructive. So context is crucial.
Yeah, thanks. I guess context sort of relates to this one a little bit as well. So, do a lot of folks struggle with complex developmental trauma, and how does the work differ between them?
Um, the answer to that is yes. I think. I mean, it it slightly depends upon what one means by the word complex. I mean, do a lot of people suffer from profound developmental trauma? Um, Probably, fortunately, not vast numbers, but sadly, many do. Um, but if complex means that somebody has experienced a lot of small t stuff, if you like, yes, incredibly large numbers, and that is far and away the sort of the largest section of my caseload, I would say. Always tracing things back to difficult stuff that people experienced during childhood, in one way or another. And as far as working with it is concerned, this is one of the areas where resources are so important. EMDR therapists who do this kind of work look a lot to try to repair early trauma by helping the client to actually imagine the childhood events happening differently from how they actually happened, in order to build up new neural networks in which the imaginary situation, the situation that didn't happen, can become very deeply embedded, so that the actual early events lose their power. And that's a very important part of how attachment-focused EMDR people will work. And the attachment-focused EMDR people are EMDR therapists who work on early stuff. Of course, it's not just EMDR therapists who work on early stuff. Many forms of therapy will focus on that too.
Thanks. Going to a slightly different track. Wondering about how people can deal with, I guess whether this is related to trauma as well, guilt of asking for compensation and negotiating.
Could we be a bit more specific about what compensation we're talking about here?
I guess it's probably related to, if you can type in the chat there, Ilyana, I'm guessing it's related to the marketing session we just had in terms of or money session we just had around money and compensation, negotiating for things.
Are we talking about pay and so
on? You there, Ilyana? Maybe we'll skip to the next one and let her respond.
No, I think
yeah.
Oh, wait, sorry. Yes, let's get a bit more detail about that, and we'll go back to it.
Oh, yeah. So she said yes, talking about pay.
Okay. I mean, that I think might very well be an example of the sort of thing that I'm talking about, where somebody feels guilty asking for something. Now, I would ask myself, what's going on there? Why do you feel guilty? Why does somebody feel guilty? This has got a lot to do with perception of self. If you're feeling guilty, then it might very well be, I mean, I obviously don't know the detail here, but it might very well be that somebody in some ways does not feel that they are worth the extra compensation, although they want to ask for it. So there may be a sort of self-concept which is about your actual worth. Now, these can be incredibly damaging, of course, and are likely to go back to childhood stuff where experiences led to a damaging sense of not having great worth, great value. I mean, it's an extremely common thing, I'm afraid to say, that comes up in therapy. People saying, I'm useless, I'm worthless, I'm no good, I'm a failure. I think that probably more than any other damaging negative thought, that sort of cluster of I'm not good enough is a thing that I find most commonly in people I work with. It's really common, and its roots are usually in childhood. So, sorry, but to give a bit more of an answer to the question, how to deal with it is to look at your concept of yourself, trace it back to where it comes from, and try to process those experiences. That, I think, would be the key to working successfully with that kind of guilt.
Yeah, it's just added there about being seen as either being rejected or being seen as greedy.
Yeah. Well, okay. So that's very helpful, because so if you asked for more when you were a child, you were told you were greedy. Okay, so that I would think is extremely important in terms of where that guilt is coming from.
Another one that's, I guess, related to what you're just saying there is someone's asked, how do you trace back to pre-verbal stuff?
That's something that is difficult, but not impossible. The important thing there is to focus on the feeling, because although our capacities to speak and indeed to think and form narrative type memories aren't with us when we're born, our capacity to feel, and particularly to feel threat and anxiety, is with us when we're born. And so sometimes the root is that you start with an emotional sense, which you will probably see reflected in some of the ways that you're experiencing your life later on. I think I mentioned earlier on, but I know I mentioned earlier on, a demonstration by Laurel Parnell, working with a woman who just had a profound sense of not feeling safe. Okay, and that so they focused on that feeling. Just, what's that? What is that like? Where is it in your body? There'll be a lot of focus on the body here, because feelings are very physically rooted things. Where are you feeling it in your body? Really focus on that, and then try to bridge back from that feeling. In that piece of work that Laura Parnell did, they went back to the woman's birth. Not, of course, that she actually remembered her birth, but it felt right to her. It felt that, yeah, this feels right. Although I have no narrative memory of my birth, but she did know the sort of the story of her birth, which her family had told her about her mother's anxiety. And thinking about that and making that connection, that felt right in a kind of visceral way to her. So she worked from the feeling via a family story to what actually was probably the pivotal event. So when you haven't got a memory, and so you haven't got words to really help you to articulate a traumatic experience, you go with a feeling, an emotional feeling and a physical feeling. So yeah, very embodied thing, actually, very, very important.
Thank you. And back to feelings and the question on anger. Someone's asked, how do you spot repressed anger in another?
Well, sometimes anger will be visible in little signs. So somebody might be very irritable, getting angry with sort of surrogates for the people that they're actually angry with, or the situations they're angry with. That somebody might be incredibly impatient. They might be sort of impossibly irritable, say in the car or something like that. Sometimes you can see it in people's defenses. For example, a kind of rather phony friendliness and anything but anger in somebody's manner. Sometimes anger is often considered to be a feature of depression. So that's kind of anger turned against the self, something that Freud identified many, many years ago, over 100 years ago now. So yeah, suppressed anger can take different forms. Also, it's important to think what would you expect a person to be from what you know about their life and their life story? Are there things that they would be likely to be angry about? I would look at somebody's history, somebody's story, to try to wonder, could there be some anger in the picture here? I mean, I would guess if somebody's suspecting suppressed anger, they've got a reason for suspecting that. So think about that and what it is that's making you suspect that there's anger around. Sorry about the dog off.
That's right. We love a dog to break things up a little bit, and let that be a reminder to people to play and move and that sort of stuff after this session and connect with others. Wondering, the only other question I sort of got here is, I guess I can link it to anger and back to the money one, is like, if you were to advocate for your worth when you're going for a job, but you lose the opportunity because they're offended because you're sort of stating a higher worth. I'm not sure if this relates as much as, is there anything you want to say on that?
Well, I mean, look, I think there's a difference between the sort of narcissistic expression of your own worth and a realistic expression of your own worth. And I think it's a healthy thing to say, I am good at these things, and I have got self-belief around that. And that's quite distinct from somebody who says, I walk on water and that sort of stuff. I'm sure we can think of some examples of the narcissistic end of the scale. I don't think that, I think it's very unlikely that somebody would have a very negative experience in an interview, say, if they're expressing their worth in a realistic way.
I think we're pretty much coming to closing now. There's not really any other questions as such in here, just some comments. Was there anything you want to do in closing, or say in closing, Roger, before I just close things out?
Just to say that it's been a pleasure doing these sessions, and I hope they've been helpful for everybody. I just hope to see you all again in some place or some context. But thank you very much for coming along, and I hope it's been useful.
Yeah, and if anyone did have anything they wanted to share with Roger about something that was helpful to them, or they just generally during all these sessions this week or today, feel free to type in the chat, or you can write it down for yourself. Some nice comments there. Really enjoyed learning. Really helpful. Thank you. And Roger, I hope you enjoy your Saturday night and weekend as well in the area. And just to close things as well, if anyone, like I said, take care of yourself after. If anything sort of like came up and you're like, just as usual, as we say, move, connect with good people, or a dog that's barking in the background. Do whatever you need to resource yourself. And there's more stuff coming up, obviously. I'll drop there in the chat again any links. Do share this. Replays are available. Share that top link with people so they can catch the replays. Whether there's something useful in this Q&A and you want people to see it, share that around. There's obviously the courses there as well. So I'll share the schedule and a little bit about those courses. If you have any problems with anything, of course, email Agatha. That's her support email. Whether that's like something that's wrong with the schedule or the replays or something like that, or you want to actually I'll just say this now while I do this. Connect that up. So of course we have all of these courses that we've offered here, and you can also contact Agatha. So we've offered this super cheap, try and make it accessible healing. Obviously there's different modalities. Roger's EMDR, there's TRE, there's somatic experiencing, there's a lot of other things out there. So there's many things. However, we think this one's really accessible for most people, and moving with Ilan to sort of heal the trauma, get to good enough in your life. She has a lot of really nice reframes as well. I've now finished the course going through it, so there's some really nice reframes and talks in there along with actual practices. So if you're interested, you can check that out. If you're from somewhere where a country where it's hard to be able to afford that exchange rates, or you're in really difficult financial times as well, do email Agatha and see what she can do for you. But that's not taking a piss. Like, oh yeah, well, you know, I buy a carton of beer every weekend, but I can't afford this. Like, not that sort of thing. Generally. So then there's also the superpowers courses, the post-traumatic growth stuff, whether you want, if you're sort of okay and you want to really build some good skills with some of the stuff you've learnt from healing processes, with little T, big T trauma stuff, the superpowers courses are great. I've started on those ones as well, and there's some great stories from a lot of the facilitators there. We've got a lot of people doing it, and as you can see, so you can get those either for personal, so going yourself, working that journey, or if you're a facilitator and want to help others do the same, that's what the facilitators course is for. There's group things like with facilitators, 6 1-hour sessions. You can sign up to at least one of those groups to help learn in that time, and there's also Q&As, and that's in this personal one. So places are limited for these ones just because there's also we want to limit it for the number of Q&As, how many people in the group. If there ends up being lots of people, then we'll have to put on more Q&As, but that's when the price rises because we've got to pay people for those. But yeah, don't rush into it. We want you to know that it's the right thing for you, and actually, well, I've got this up, I may as well share the schedule. But yeah, don't rush into these things. Just make the right choice for you. So we've just finished the Q&A, and next up we have Mark and Paul making trauma healing playful. Paul was Mark's mentor, still is Mark's mentor, and that will be a lot of fun. There'll be some bad jokes, probably not to be easily offended. Paul does all sorts of dad jokes, and we've got Mark and Patricia coming up looking at trauma, procrastination, impulsivity. Mark will be also talking a bit about ADHD and his experience with that there. We've got David Pacelli, who's great, founder of TRE. I recorded this one with him because he's on holiday this week. That's great little session. We've got another Q&A with Patricia. We've got Mel coming up about vulnerability. Daniela about Zoom fatigue. Take care of yourselves. Don't binge watch these sessions. Another one with Mel, getting your shit together, chaos. And then this one's also about family stuff. Patricia's works a lot with family and constellations stuff in her therapy. So looking at not passing on trauma generation to generation. Finally, Ilan finishing things off. So a lot of stuff still coming up, and do take care of yourself. As I say, it's a beautiful day here in the UK, at least in the southeast where we are. So thank you, Roger. Thank you, everyone. Any final thing? I know I just said that, Roger, but if you want to say anything else before I close, then you can do so.
Well, I was actually was thinking just a few things that occurred to me about the superpowers question, because in a way, to end on a bright note, to think that trauma actually isn't always a disaster, and I imagine that quite a lot of the talks on the program have been saying this, that actually trauma can be a growth, an experience from which we take a lot of growth. And there are just three obvious things. Trauma enormously can enhance your capacity for empathy and understanding other people, which is extremely important. It can make you a much better parent, I think, and it's I think quite common that parents who that people who have had difficult experiences growing up, the sort of kind that I was talking about earlier on today, will often then make sure that they don't pass those sorts of experiences on to their own children, and so they're much better at nurturing and supporting the development of their own children. And the other thing that comes to mind is that from trauma you can, to survive it can be tremendously powerful for your own self-belief. I've been through something really difficult, but I survived. And so, what that does to one's sense of self can be really, really valuable.
Great, thank you, Roger. And I love ending this Q&A session week with a positive note. So really appreciate that, and thanks for your time.
Okay, bye-bye. Bye.
Cheers, everyone. And
cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.
I'll just answer that question. What's the name of the woman who worked with women not safety all the time? You might be if it's someone who's taught this week, it might be Erica, Erica Chalkley, if that's what you're referring to. Cheers all.
Okay.